Celeste Harmon was 37 years old, and for 9 years she had been the kind of woman her husband introduced at parties as his rock, which is what men say when they mean they are standing on top of you. She drove a 10-year-old Nissan with a dent in the rear bumper she had never gotten around to fixing. She wore her work clothes 2 days in a row without anyone noticing because her work clothes were sensible and dark and built to last. She clipped grocery coupons not because she had to, but because her grandfather had taught her that $1 saved quietly was worth more than $1 spent loudly, and she had never stopped believing that. Her husband Deshawn's friends called her Steady Celeste, always with a slight emphasis on steady that made it sound like a consolation prize. And Deshawn had never once corrected them. What Deshawn had never thought to ask, not in 9 years of marriage, not once, was why his mother's medical bills kept getting paid in full every single month when he had told the hospital they were on a payment plan he could barely manage. On the morning he served her the divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences in a document his attorney had drafted with a woman named Tanya Webb, listed in the supporting affidavits, Celeste sat at the kitchen table, where she had eaten breakfast for 9 years, and read the papers the way she read every contract her logistics firm sent her. Carefully, without expression, looking for what was missing. What was missing was the part where he had any idea what she had been quietly building for the last 6 years. $112,000. That was what she had paid toward Dorothy Harmon's cardiac care, dialysis, and specialist visits since the spring that Deshawn had told his mother the bills were simply more than they could manage. He had told his mother that. Celeste had made sure the bills were paid the following Monday. What happened after Dorothy found out would cost Deshawn every relationship he had left in the world. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. October mornings in Memphis had a particular quality of light that Celeste had always loved, the kind that came in low and amber through east-facing windows, and made everything look considered, intentional, like the world had taken its time arranging itself before anyone had to face it. She was at the kitchen counter by 5:45, the way she always was, with her coffee and the binder she kept her household accounts in, going through the month's figures with the same methodical attention she brought to every routing manifest at work. The binder was one of 12 she kept in a fireproof cabinet in the home office. Deshawn had seen it exactly once and had called it her worry book, which told her everything she needed to know about the different ways two people can look at the same object. She had built the oak shelving unit in that office herself, measured and cut and finished over a long weekend 4 years ago, while Deshawn was at a conference in Dallas. It held her professional certifications, her reference binders, her grandfather's old ledger books, and a small framed photograph of her grandfather Earl in his postal carrier uniform, taken sometime in the late 1970s in a town outside Nashville. Earl had died when Celeste was 22, 2 years into her logistics degree, and he had left her 3 things: a modest savings account, a cast iron skillet, and the conviction that any woman who understood where things were and how they moved would never be without leverage. She had built her entire career on that last inheritance. She had met Deshawn at a freight industry trade event in Nashville when she was 28, and he was 30. He had a good laugh and a directness she respected, and he had asked her 3 smart questions about her work before asking anything personal, which was a thing she had not forgotten. They were married 14 months later in her grandmother's backyard in a ceremony with 40 people and no debt. Those early years had been real. She did not pretend otherwise. What changed was gradual, and then not. The conference trips extended. The evenings went quiet in a different way than the comfortable quiet they had started with. She noticed, because she was a woman who noticed things, the small recalibrations. the phone placed face down. The dry cleaning pickup he started handling himself. A weekend bag that came back smelling not like his deodorant, but like something floral and unfamiliar. She had noted each detail the way she noted discrepancies in a shipment manifest. Filed, dated, waiting for pattern. The signal came on a Tuesday when she returned from a client site visit in Little Rock 2 hours ahead of schedule and found a receipt on the kitchen counter. It was from a restaurant downtown, printed that same afternoon, for a lunch that cost $187 and had been charged to the joint account. 2 people. A bottle of wine, dessert. She had eaten a gas station sandwich for lunch that day in a parking lot outside a freight depot. She picked up the receipt and looked at it for a long time. Then she set it back exactly where she had found it. She did not move anything. She went to the bedroom, changed her clothes, and sat down at the oak desk she had built, and she opened her laptop. Her hands did not shake. They had never shaken in a crisis. Her grandfather had been the same way. He used to say that the time to feel things was after the work was done, and she had found this to be practically and emotionally sound advice. She started with the joint account. 3 months of statements, downloaded and sorted by date. The pattern was there immediately, the way patterns always were once you decided to look. Lunches on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, always between noon and 2, always at restaurants she did not recognize, always charged to the joint card he carried, and she rarely checked because she had her own. 41 transactions over 4 months. The total came to $3,200. It was not the money. The money was almost beside the point. She kept going. Hotel charges. She found 6 of them over the previous 8 months. 3 in Memphis, 2 in Nashville, 1 in Birmingham. All mid-range properties, all weekend dates that corresponded to trips Deshawn had attributed to industry events or visits to a college friend named Marcus in Huntsville. She had never called Marcus to confirm. She had trusted. She cross-referenced the Birmingham date against her own travel calendar. She had been on a 3-day client trip to Atlanta that weekend. He had told her he was staying home to catch up on yard work. She looked at the oak shelves she had built, and she thought about what they held, and she thought about what her grandfather had said about leverage, and she made a list, clean and itemized, of every piece of evidence she had found, with dates, amounts, and account references. Then she opened a second document. She titled it Medical. She pulled up the payment confirmation emails she had saved in a dedicated folder for 6 years. $112,000 in certified payments to the Memphis Cardiac and Nephrology Center on behalf of Dorothy Harmon, Deshawn's mother, who had been told by her son that the family was doing the best they could and that the hospital had them on an extended payment arrangement. Dorothy did not know. Deshawn did not know Celeste knew he had told his mother that. Celeste had found out from Dorothy herself over Sunday dinner 3 weeks after Deshawn had told the hospital what he told them. When Dorothy had mentioned with quiet and dignified sorrow that she didn't want to be a burden. Celeste had gone home that evening and set up a separate payment account that Dorothy would never see and that Deshawn would never think to look for. She had done it because Dorothy was a good woman, and because it was the right thing to do, and because she had not yet understood what kind of man she was married to. She understood now. She picked up her phone and sent a message to a woman named Brenda Osai, who was her attorney for business matters, and who had a reputation in commercial litigation circles for being extraordinarily thorough and extraordinarily unhurried, which were the 2 qualities Celeste valued most in anyone she worked with. The message said, "I need a personal appointment. This week if possible. It's time." Brenda responded within the hour. Thursday at 9. Bring everything. Bitterness, her grandfather had once told her, required ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer deserved it. She had no intention of investing further. That Thursday morning, Celeste sat across from Brenda Osei in an office on the 7th floor of a building in Midtown Memphis with a view of the river. And she set her documentation binder on the table and watched Brenda go through it page by page without a word. Brenda had been practicing family and commercial law for 22 years. She did not flinch at the hotel receipts. She did not soften at the medical payment records. She read with her reading glasses low on her nose and her pen moving steadily, and when she finished, she closed the binder and looked at Celeste with the level expression of someone who had seen a great deal and was not surprised by any of it. She said, "He filed first." Celeste said yes. Brenda said, "He has no idea what you've built separately." Celeste said, "Known." Brenda picked up her pen. "Then he filed too soon. And that's going to matter considerably." The Harmon Logistics Consulting account had been established 6 years ago under Celeste's maiden name, Celeste Marie Dupree, as a sole proprietorship that had grown steadily through referral work she took on in the evenings and on weekends, while Deshawn believed she was running long baths and reading. The account held $340,000 in retained earnings and had 3 active corporate contracts worth a combined $890,000 annually. Deshawn had never been a party to it. His name appeared nowhere in its documentation. He had no legal claim to it because he had never known it existed. He had also, Brenda noted, signed a postnuptial financial disclosure form 4 years ago. A document Celeste had asked him to sign as part of a routine financial planning process she described as something her firm's accountant recommended, that enumerated the joint marital assets and excluded, by specific language, any assets held in individual business capacity by either party. He had signed it in 4 minutes without reading it closely. She knew this because she had been watching the clock. 3 days after the attorney meeting, Celeste drove out to Germantown to see her father's older sister, Auntie Vera, who was 71 years old, and had the particular stillness of someone who had survived enough to know that very little required speed. They sat on Vera's back porch with sweet tea while the late October afternoon cooled around them, and Celeste told her everything. Vera listened without interrupting. When Celeste finished, Vera was quiet for a moment, rocking slowly, looking out at the garden she had kept for 40 years. Then she said, "Earl always said the same thing. He said a woman who keeps good records never has to raise her voice, because the records do the talking." Celeste held that sentence on the drive home. She let it settle into the place where the grief was still trying to find its shape, and she found, as she always did with the truth, that it was easier to carry than the alternative. The following Monday, Brenda's investigator confirmed what Celeste had already begun to suspect about Tanya Webb. She was a marketing coordinator at a corporate event firm that had done work for Deshawn's employer. She had been involved with Deshawn, based on the documentation trail, for approximately 14 months. She drove a car registered in her own name, carried a significant balance of personal debt, and had recently applied for a lease on an apartment in East Memphis. The application listed a co-signer. The co-signer was Deshawn Harmon. He had been building a second household, with money from the first one. Brenda's forensic review of the joint accounts identified $28,400 in transfers over 11 months to a savings account Celeste had not been aware of, opened in Deshawn's name alone, from which withdrawals had been made in cash and in payments to vendors and addresses consistent with the East Memphis apartment build-out. Furniture. A deposit. Utilities setup. He had been furnishing a life for someone else using the money Celeste had helped earn and had trusted him to steward. She drove home that evening and she made his favorite dinner, red beans and rice with smothered chicken, the way his mother had taught her. She set the table. She asked about his day, and he said busy, and she said she understood, and she passed him the bread and poured him water, and she sat across from him in the kitchen of the house she had helped pay for, and she listened to him talk about nothing in particular, and she was completely composed. He looked at her once, halfway through dinner, with something that might have been guilt or might have been habit, and she smiled and asked if he wanted more rice, and he said yes, and she got up and served him and sat back down and finished her meal. He did not look closely enough to see anything. Preparation was the whole of the work. Everything else was just arrival. The reckoning came on a Saturday afternoon in the third week of November in the dining room of Dorothy Harmon's house in Orange Mound, where Dorothy had lived for 34 years and where Celeste had eaten Sunday dinners for 9 of them. Dorothy had called Deshawn that morning and asked him to come for lunch. She had called Celeste separately and asked her to come as well. Deshawn did not know Celeste had been invited. Celeste arrived first. Brenda was not in the room. She did not need to be. This was not a legal proceeding. This was something quieter and more permanent. Dorothy Harmon was 68 years old and had survived 2 cardiac events and 12 years of dialysis and the loss of her husband and the long labor of raising a son she had believed. Until recently she understood. She was small and precise, and she had a way of sitting very still when something important was happening that Celeste had always admired. She was sitting very still when Deshawn came through the door and found his wife already at the table. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at Celeste. He looked at his mother. Dorothy said, "Sit down, baby." He sat. Dorothy placed a folder on the table. Inside it were the payment confirmation records Celeste had printed and organized chronologically. 6 years of certified payments to Memphis Cardiac and Nephrology, itemized by date and amount, totaling $112,000, all from an account in Celeste's name that Dorothy had never seen before that morning. She had given the folder to Dorothy 2 days prior, over coffee, quietly, without theater. Dorothy had read every page. She had not spoken for a long time when she finished. Then she had said, simply, that she wanted her son to see it. Deshawn looked at the first page, then the second. The color left his face in stages. He looked up at Celeste. She looked back at him without expression. He said, "I was going to pay it. I just needed more time." Dorothy said, in the voice she used when the conversation was over, "You told me the hospital had us on a plan. You told me that for 6 years. You let me believe I was a burden that you were managing. And all that time," she stopped. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. He turned back to Celeste. He said her name. He said he could explain the rest of it. He said he had been under pressure she didn't understand, and that Tanya was a mistake, and that he wanted to find a way through this together. Celeste waited until he had finished. Then she said, "You spent 9 years deciding what kind of woman I was. You decided I was the kind who wouldn't notice and wouldn't prepare, and wouldn't be able to stand on her own when you were done. You were wrong about all 3. I'm not angry about the divorce, Deshawn. I'm grateful for the clarity." She stood. She gathered the one folder she had brought, the post-nuptial disclosure, signed in his hand, with the relevant clause highlighted in yellow, and she set it on the table in front of him without comment. She kissed Dorothy on the cheek. She walked to the front door, and she let herself out into the November afternoon, and she stood on Dorothy Harmon's porch for a moment. The same porch where she had shelled butter beans on summer evenings and helped string Christmas lights in December. And she breathed the cold, clean air. And then she walked to her car and drove away. She did not look back at the house. She had built what she needed to build. The rest would stand on its own. 10 months later, the Memphis winter had come and gone, and the long, slow warmth of September had returned to the city. And Celeste Dupree, she had returned to her grandfather's name in January, simply and without announcement, was sitting on the back porch of a house she had purchased in her own name in Cooper Young. A narrow craftsman with a deep lot and a kitchen she was in the process of renovating herself, tile by deliberate tile. A man named Calvin Reese sometimes sat in the other porch chair. He was a high school history teacher who coached the debate team and who had met Celeste at a community planning meeting for a neighborhood greenway project she had been contracted to help coordinate. He had asked her, 3 meetings in, whether she'd want to get coffee sometime in the direct and uncomplicated way of someone who had decided to be honest about what he wanted. She had said yes. He asked good questions and laughed easily and did not try to fill her silences with noise. He was exactly as present as she needed him to be, and no more. And she had decided that was exactly right. Her logistics consultancy, now operating fully under the Dupree name, had expanded its client base by 30% since January. She had brought on a second contractor and was in conversation with a municipal transportation authority about a routing efficiency contract worth $1 million over 3 years. She had mentored 2 young women from the neighborhood through their logistics certifications. She was tired in the way that comes from work that matters, which was a different kind of tired than anything she had felt in the last years of her marriage. She had heard about Deshawn through a mutual acquaintance who had told her without relish and without detail. He had been passed over for a promotion after an internal review flagged some financial irregularities in his expense reporting. He was renting a studio apartment. Tanya Webb had ended their arrangement sometime around the spring. His mother had not restored full contact. That part, the acquaintance had said, was the part that was costing him. Celeste had listened and said she was sorry to hear it and moved the conversation to something else. She was not sorry. She was also not glad. She was simply on the other side of it, which was the only place worth being. On the porch in September, with her coffee and the sound of the neighborhood waking up around her, she pressed the last piece of tile into the sample board she had been laying out for the kitchen backsplash. A deep teal she had chosen because it reminded her of a scarf her grandmother had worn, practical and quietly beautiful. She set it in place and looked at it for a moment. She thought about her grandfather's ledger books on the shelf in her new office. She thought about Dorothy Harmon, who had called her twice since January, once to ask about a contractor referral and once just to talk, the way she had always talked to Celeste, like she was someone worth knowing. She thought about the oak shelving unit that was still in a storage unit pending the renovation, waiting for the room she was building around it. She had built everything worth keeping. She was still building. Freedom, her grandfather had told her, was the real currency. She was spending it exactly as she pleased. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.